Part 9. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 85. The countdown that appeared above their heads out of thin air surprised Su Tong and Yuxia. What does this thing mean? Looking at the sudden countdown, both of them had a bad feeling in their hearts. Look at the time above, there are still 10 hours left. Could it be that there will be any problems after 10 hours? This couldn't help but remind them that when they entered the script world, it seemed that it was after the countdown ended that the virus began to suddenly break out. In the midst of doubts, Aunt Wang began to call the two of them upstairs. The two of them walked upstairs and took a look, only to see Aunt Wang pointing at the computer screen. When the two of them took a look, it turned out to be surveillance. It's natural when you think about it. Whose supermarket doesn't have surveillance cameras installed, but Aunt Wang obviously has a lot of surveillance cameras. In addition to the surveillance on the first and second floors of the corridors, there are also surveillance on the main entrance and the back wall of the community. However, it is not difficult to understand if you compare the fragmented memories in their minds. 1/3 of the houses in this community are under Aunt Wang's name. On weekdays, the water, electricity, and garbage cleaning fees of the residents of the community are also paid by Aunt Wang. The reason why the property was left in despair last month was largely due to Aunt Wang. In other words, Aunt Wang is the property of the community, but in name only. Look outside the door. After Aunt Wang clicked on the camera outside the gate, Su Tong and Yuxia's expressions instantly became unnatural. They saw that at some point, a large number of infected people gathered outside the gate. The number was so large that the camera captured all the infected people. Just the tip of the iceberg. Not only that, Su Tong also discovered that there were also many infected people gathering in the park behind the community. It seems like the fireworks we set off attracted all the infected people around us. The ranger stared at the display screen, and the confidence brought about by unlocking the item card was instantly gone. Too many ants will kill an elephant, not to mention that he is no more than a porcupine now. This black mass of infected people rushed towards him. No matter how powerful his ability was, don't forget that activating the ability consumes script points. With the few script points in his hand, he probably wouldn't be able to hold on for a few minutes. To be consumed. But the good news is that these infected people did not attack, they just stood in front of the gate and surrounded the entire community. It seems that as long as you don't stimulate them too much at this time, they won't rush in. Can I see the surveillance video on the second floor? At this time, Su Tong said to Aunt Wang, "It's the video from 10 minutes ago." Aunt Wang nodded and skillfully opened the playback record. After clicking it, the video showed the scene where the ranger stabbed the woman to death with a spear. "I didn't mean to kill her. She screamed too loudly at the time. I was also worried about attracting those infected, so I killed her out of desperation." The ranger looked at the surveillance replay, and his face suddenly became unhappy. Even if it's just killing someone, it's nothing at all, but to do this in front of everyone and watch the replay, I still feel a little unspeakable guilt. But Su Tong and Aunt Wang didn't seem to care about this problem. They stared at the screen. About a minute later, a female corpse appeared on the screen. "Stop." Su Tong pressed the pause button and looked at the female corpse on the screen with a serious expression. Judging from the picture, most of the female corpse's head has been eaten away. With such wounds, even an infected person should have lost the ability to move. However, the female corpse was not only astonishingly fast, but also seemed to suddenly appear on the surveillance screen. Su Tong tried to slow down the surveillance 20 times to play back, but he could only see a series of blurry shadows. The weirder thing was yet to come. As the surveillance screen was zoomed in, he actually saw the baby in the female corpse's arms, and at the end it seemed that he had raised his arm. Is this a player? The ranger stood behind and watched. Seeing that the female corpse was so mysterious, he couldn't help but guess the identity of the female corpse. Player, Su Tong looked back at him and shook his head. The player who has a skylight on his head is also a dead player. After saying that, he stopped reading. In short, this female corpse was very weird and different from other infected people. But he didn't believe that the female corpse was a player. He even suspected that the infected people who suddenly blocked them in the room might have something to do with this female corpse. What on earth is she going to do? Did the baby really come back to life, or perhaps became infected? With all kinds of doubts, Su Tong thought for a long time, but couldn't come up with any clue. Finally, he closed his eyes and simply lay down on the pile of boxes in the warehouse and started to sleep. Early the next morning, before dawn, Su Tong was awakened by a huge explosion. There was a violent explosion, and if you listened carefully, you could still hear the roar of the locomotive. He suddenly stood up and went to the window on the second floor facing the park to take a closer look, but he couldn't see anything. He could only hear the roar of the locomotive getting farther and farther away. What happened? The ranger was also awakened and hurriedly came forward to ask. But Su Tong didn't understand either, but when the two turned on the surveillance camera, they found that most of the infected people outside the door had left at once. This finally made them feel relieved. He raised his head and glanced at the countdown suspended above his head. There was still 1 hour left and it would end. He didn't know what would happen in an hour. After being tortured like this, the two of them lost sleep and sat on the stairs waiting for the countdown above their heads to end. "You are a good guy." At this time, the ranger handed Su Tong a can of beer and asked, "You guess." Su Tong casually opened the lid of the can, took a sip, and asked the reverse ranger, "It must be true. Your words and deeds are very consistent with the identity card of a good person, and I am actually a bad person. Have you ever thought that we might have a bifurcation or even an opposition in the subsequent missions?" The ranger took a sip of the beer in his hand. Before entering the world of this script, he thought about many possibilities, the biggest possibility being camp opposition. But he never expected that the script world would actually be the setting of the end of the world. Moreover, the rapid outbreak of the virus and the alarming number of infected people caught him off guard. "So you killed that woman on purpose, right?" Su Tong raised his head and stared at the ranger's face with his black and white eyes. Silence. The ranger didn't defend himself. At this time, Zhang Qiang, who was lying on the small bed in front of them, woke up in a daze. He seemed to have been awakened by urination. He rubbed his eyes with one hand and walked forward unsteadily. "I don't know if I was too sleepy, but my feet suddenly slipped, and my body was about to fall backwards." "Hey," the ranger's heart tightened because he saw the tripod placed on the ground. Fortunately, Su Tong had quick eyes and quick hands. He grabbed the boy's collar and lifted him up. At this moment, Zhang Qiang suddenly lost his sleepiness. He stared blankly at the tripod behind him. It was made of pure iron and was used to fix the umbrella. Looking at the rust stains on it, Zhang Qiang couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of spit. "It's okay, go to the toilet." Su Tong patted his little head and comforted him for a few words before Zhang Qiang came to his senses and hurriedly rushed into the toilet at a trot. He sat next to the ranger again and said, "Did something suddenly come to your mind just now?" The ranger nodded numbly. Su Tong patted his chest. "That thing is called conscience." As he spoke, he ignored the confused expression on the ranger's face, got up and went to cook instant noodles. "I remembered that I saw canned beef on the shelf just now, and I happened to eat braised beef noodles." Conscience. After Su Tong left, Yuxia thought about what he just said, took a sip of the beer in his hand, and looked at his heart involuntarily. In fact, instant noodles are not delicious. But at this time, it is already an excellent delicacy. Add some vegetables to relieve the greasiness, and pair it with a can of canned beef. The taste is delicious. While eating and waiting, Su Tong and the others still didn't feel anything different until the countdown ended. This makes people a little confused. What exactly does this countdown mean? Is it a reminder? Or a warning? In confusion, it was already noon in the blink of an eye. Su Tong turned on his phone and found that Monkey had sent him a message this morning. Younghui, how are you? Oh my god, I almost froze to death here last night. It's so cold that I'm going crazy with hunger now. Looking at the message from the monkey, Su Tong couldn't help but glance at the apple in his hand, muttering to himself, shameful waste, so he took a bite and looked at the next message. I saw the fireworks set off by your house last night. I was almost scared to death. You don't know how many dead people were running towards your house. I stood on top and could see clearly. Don't do it again. Su Tong continued to scroll down. There was a gap of more than 10 minutes between the text message below and the one above. I was so stupid that I almost died. Fortunately, I ran fast. It turned out that this morning, he saw no infected people on the street. He thought that the fireworks last night might have attracted most of the infected people away, so he wanted to see if there was a chance to escape. As soon as I got down, I found that the corridor was packed with infected people. Fortunately, he ran quickly and locked the corridor door. After reading these short messages, Su Tong quickly replied, "Are you still there?" After a few minutes, the monkey replied, "Exist. What's with the roar and explosion of the locomotive this morning?" Su Tong asked him about what happened in the morning. There was a group of people who wanted to escape in a car, but the sound of the engine starting brought out a large number of monsters hiding in the corner, and surrounded their family. Then I don't know what happened, but their car it exploded directly. As for the sound of the motorcycle, I also heard it, but I didn't see the specific situation. In short, I still say, don't come out, there are too many of these monsters. After the two said a few words, Monkey suddenly sent a photo. Younghui, look, I discovered something big. These monsters are starting to fight among themselves. Su Tong clicked on the photo and took a look. After the photo reading was completed, a relatively clear photo appeared in front of him. Looking carefully, I found that a relatively strong infected person in the photo actually started to grab the other two infected people and start eating them. Seeing this photo, Su Tong's mood was completely opposite to that of a monkey. After carefully staring at the large infected person in the photo, he suddenly had a strong premonition. This did not seem to be a good sign. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 86. After carefully examining the photo, he sent a message to the monkey to get a clearer picture. After a while, Monkey sent a few more photos. After carefully comparing them, he felt a lot heavier. There were several corpses of other infected people around this huge infected person, all of which had their heads bitten off. This guy was hunting, and he was hunting other infected people in a planned way. The infected people he selected were all much smaller than him, and he didn't touch some of the slightly stronger ones. This shows that the infected person seems to have his own consciousness, or the most basic thinking. After letting the monkey hide for the time being and telling him to pay attention to the infected person, Su Tong turned off his cell phone. After turning off his mobile phone, Su Tong sat in front of the surveillance camera and began to carefully observe the images on the surveillance camera. Seeing how nervous he looked, the ranger looked disapproving. He gnawed on a piece of ham, held an apple in his left hand, and hummed a little song. Anyway, the main mission 1 will be completed tomorrow. By then he will unlock another prop card and his strength will be almost restored. By then, as long as he does not encounter such large-scale infected people, he will be able to kill them easily. Even if we encounter him, so what? If we can't defeat him, why can't he run away? With his own ability, he can easily leave these infected people behind. It is precisely with this thought that the ranger feels very relaxed. There is food and drink here, and his life is more comfortable than that of a god. However, This relaxed state of mind was suddenly changed at night. Su Tong looked at the monitor in front of him and had been sitting there for a whole day. Even Aunt Wang came to reassure him. There are 2 floors in the supermarket. To prevent theft, the glass is made of 3 layers of tempered glass, and anti-theft windows are also added. The main door has an anti-theft and fireproof rolling shutter door. Even if someone breaks in, there is also a layer of anti-theft door. Even if those infected are extremely powerful, they can't even think of getting in. Having said that, Su Tong still felt uneasy, but he had nothing to do anyway, so he casually chatted with Aunt Wang. I don't know who started the conversation and started talking about Aunt Wang's past. Mentioning the photo of her winning the championship, Aunt Wang's eyes were obviously shining with fire. That year she competed in a weightlifting competition over 87 kilograms. The opponents were the 2 national champions of Russia and Japan, among whom the Russian bitch was the previous world champion. The first snatch was 133 kilograms, but she didn't catch it. For this reason, I was ridiculed by that Japanese girl. I was so angry at the time. In the second round, I went straight to the 142 kilogram snatch and 180 kilograms clean and jerk. The little Jap girl's face turned black at that time. In the last round, I went straight to the 195 kilograms clean and jerk, with a total score of 337 kilograms. The Jap's coach at the time, you even pushed her to the stage and tried her best, but you didn't look at her face at that time, she was almost in tears. Speaking of her courage back then, Aunt Wang's face lit up with an unstoppable confidence. That year, her name became a monument in the history of weightlifting. That year, countless flashlights and flowers surrounded her. It was also that year that she lost her left leg forever. Mentioning this matter, Aunt Wang opened her left pant leg, and Su Tong discovered that her left leg was actually a prosthetic leg. It's an accident. A training mistake was the result. Aunt Wang took out a bottle of Coke from the refrigerator and handed it to him. Speaking of that training, everything was normal. But when she put the lever on the steel frame, who would have thought that the steel frame suddenly fell over? A 500 kilogram dumbbell hit his left leg. When he woke up, he was lying alone in the hospital. The coach took a quick look and left, never to come again. His family went through the retirement procedures for him and took the train back to his hometown. It was then that he realized that what he had lost was not only his left leg, but also the glory he had worked hard for with time and sweat. The only thing I can take with me are those photos. As for the retirement money and compensation, most of it was used for his medical treatment and follow-up treatment, and the remaining part was quickly squandered. Unfortunately, my family was demolished and I lost several houses and a lot of money, so I just opened the supermarket and became a housekeeper. Aunt Wang spoke very relaxedly, as if she had no dissatisfaction with her fate. But is this really the case? He glanced at the barbells in the corner. What's wrong with that child? Seeing that Aunt Wang's mood seemed a little unstable, Su Tong casually changed the topic. I don't know. I went to several big hospitals, but nothing was found. I could only give him an antibiotic. It can relieve the pain, but one bottle costs several thousand. His parents both go out to work. We are half relatives with this child, so I will keep him here to help take care of him. While the two were saying this, Su Tong suddenly saw something wrong in the surveillance video. Etc. He interrupted Aunt Wang's continued words and stared directly at the monitor in front of him. In the picture, an infected person appeared wandering on the steps of the second floor. He didn't know what he was doing. After going up and down several times, he actually appeared on the screen with another infected person. Just when he was wondering what this guy was going to do, a surprising scene appeared. He suddenly stepped forward and bit the neck of the infected person in front. Then he opened his head and started to eat it. There was no sound from the surveillance, but seeing this guy gorging on food still made my heart feel chilly. Is this guy crazy from hunger? Aunt Wang stared at the surveillance camera and watched him chew off her companion's neck. She swallowed and subconsciously touched her own neck. After taking a few random bites, the infected person left his companion aside, then walked downstairs. About 10 minutes later, he unexpectedly brought up another companion. Still using the same method, he gnawed off the opponent's head unexpectedly, and his face showed an expression of satisfaction. Now Aunt Wang was dumbfounded. If she could explain it by saying she was hungry and crazy just now, then it is obvious now that this guy has the ability to think. Not only would he trick other infected people into killing them, he would even sneak attack and hide the corpses. But what was even weirder was yet to come. When the infected person killed and ate his third companion, he suddenly raised his head. Two pairs of flashing green eyes were staring at the surveillance camera. Then he slowly stretched out his hand and put it on the wall. There were actually very slender barbs on his fingers, which were firmly hooked on the wall. His limbs were like spiders, climbing on the wall, getting closer to the camera little by little, and pulled the green pupil stick to it. Although he knew that he could not see them through the camera, looking at the green pupil on the screen, a strong sense of voyeurism made Ms. Wang feel very uncomfortable, as if this guy was really staring at her. Snapped. At this time, the surveillance screen suddenly turned into a black screen. Su Tong immediately switched surveillance, hoping to capture traces of the infected person through surveillance in other directions. However, when Su Tong adjusted the screen to the first floor, what appeared in front of the two people was a face with a mouth full of blood. Oh! At this moment, Aunt Wang was startled. Looking at the face that had been waiting in front of the surveillance camera for a long time, she felt a chill, as if a big insect was crawling up your spine, making all the pores in your body tremble. Unable to stop tightening. When Su Tong saw this, he immediately turned off the surveillance camera, stood up and walked downstairs. Hey! You! The ranger downstairs was lying on a chair smoking. When he saw Su Tong walking downstairs, he was about to say something when he saw him grabbing the big knife next to the door, pushing open the iron door and walking out. Holy shit, you're crazy. Seeing Su Tong's actions, the ranger was stunned for a moment, not understanding what this guy was going to do. But when he saw him pushing open the iron door, as if he was about to walk out, the ranger jumped up and rushed forward. However, when he rushed to the iron gate, he found that Su Tong had opened the rolling shutter door and was standing at the door with a knife in his hand. You're crazy, what are you doing? Get in quickly. The ranger stepped forward to hold him, but Su Tong remained unmoved, staring at the dark world in front of him, as if waiting for something. Upon seeing this, the ranger was about to pull the sliding door down again when he suddenly saw two green eyes looking this way in the darkness. An infected person was seen crawling out of the darkness, but strangely, the infected person did not pounce on him immediately. He just stared at Su Tong and let out a giggle. Laugh. What is this stuff? The ranger looked carefully at the infected person in front of him. He didn't notice anything wrong with this guy for a while, until he imitated the human appearance, stood up, gave a thumbs up, and lightly scratched his neck. Only then did the rangers realize that the infected person in front of them was actually provoking them. Is this still an infected person? Suddenly, the ranger felt that his three views had been subverted. Just when he realized that he wanted to kill the infected person, he saw the other party's figure flash and quickly disappear into the darkness. Su Tong watched this guy running fast, climbing up the wall like a spider, and climbed to the roof in a blink of an eye. He frowned and pulled the rolling shutter door down again. What on earth is going on? Why is that guy infected? Su Tong didn't say anything and just asked the ranger to take a look at the surveillance video. At this time, Aunt Wang came down from upstairs and said, except for the gate, all the surveillance in other places has been destroyed. In the middle of the night, after the ranger watched the entire video, he couldn't help but feel chills all over his body. Especially when the screen switched to the first floor, the face that suddenly popped up made him so scared that the hairs on his body stood up. That countdown is probably a countdown to difficulty upgrade. Every time the countdown ends, the strength of these infected people will increase. What should I do? The ranger is in a hurry. It's already difficult to deal with, but the T-girl knows how to upgrade, and there are so many of them. This is a joke. Su Tong took out his mobile phone and took a look at the photos sent by Monkey at noon. After thinking for a moment, he raised his head and looked at the ranger and Ant Wang in front of him, and uttered one word, escape. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 87. Escape. Ranger and Ant Wang looked at each other. Escape? Are you sure? You're probably scared to death. The ranger's words were not polite at all, but he had his own reasons. Where to escape to? There are infected people everywhere here, where should we run? Besides, tomorrow night is almost the time when the main mission is completed. At that time, they will be able to unlock another prop card, which is just a small infected person. They can kill him by activating any ability. Even if he escapes, where can he escape to? It's safe here, you don't have to worry about food and drink, there are ceiling fans at night, and you can even take a hot bath. Where else could you escape to a more comfortable place than here? Therefore, in the eyes of the ranger, Su Tong was so frightened that he was so frightened by an infected person that he ran away. Su Tong looked at Ant Wang again. Ant Wang was very embarrassed. She had already realized something, but she glanced at her left leg and finally shook her head. My legs are not suitable for intense exercise. If you want to leave, I won't force you. Seeing that the two of them obviously had no intention of escaping, Su Tong did not intend to persuade them, because it was useless to say anything now. Wait until tomorrow, and he believed that reality would tell them what cruelty is. However, the slap of reality came faster than he expected. At 5 o'clock in the morning, when everyone was sleeping soundly, a shrill scream woke everyone up. When Su Tong and the others woke up, they saw a young man hanging in the air outside the building through the window on the first floor. A slender tongue curled around the young man's feet. Looking up again, isn't it the infected person just now? In just such a short time, such a long tongue has evolved. Not only that, this guy's face has also been completely deformed. It looks like a humanoid frog no matter how you look at it. His two eyes have become huge and round, and his face has developed horizontally to both sides. It looks like a frog's head. I saw him hanging the young man in the air, not in a hurry to eat it, but instead attracting all the infected people in the yard. Help, I don't want to die, spare me, ah. Looking at the infected people below, the young man was so frightened that he peed his pants, wailing in pain and begging Frogface for mercy. Oops, isn't that Xiao's son? Oh, why was he caught? This kid usually seems quite smart. Ant Wang's heart suddenly clenched her fists for the young man. She had the impression that this child was quite a nice person. He often helped the elderly in the hospital and so on. Everyone liked this child very much. He wants to be king. When Su Tong saw this, he immediately guessed what Frogface wanted to do. Proclaim yourself king. Yu Xia and Ant Wang didn't understand what it meant. Frogface had already thrown the young man directly towards the infected people downstairs. In an instant, the young man was torn apart and torn into pieces by the infected people who rushed towards him without even touching the ground. At this moment, the guy actually jumped down from the roof of the building and crushed the head of an infected person with his kick. Seeing this, the other infected people actually pounced on him and opened their mouths. As a result, Frogface slapped him in the face the next second, and the sharp barbs directly tore the infected man's head in half. Seeing their companions being slapped on the head by Frog Face, the other infected people seemed to be shocked. Not daring to move forward any further, they all stepped back. Seeing this, Frog Face kicked off his legs and actually jumped directly to the third floor. Soon a man was dragged out by him. He used the same method as before. He hung the man in the air and let the man's screams and curses spread the infection. The people gathered again. Then he threw it down. This time the other infected people seemed to have learned the lesson and watched the man fall to the ground, half dead. Frog Face jumped down from the third floor. He seemed to be satisfied with the effect. He stretched out his hand and tore off the man's thigh before signaling to the other infected people that they were the ones left. Immediately, a group of infected people pounced on it and started eating. Damn, this beast still knows the trick. The ranger was a little anxious, as the Frog Face evolved far faster than he expected. It is fast, its tongue can attack, and it has a pair of sharp claws covered with barbs. Now it is actually trying to dominate the mountain. If you give it some time, no one can say how far this guy can grow. He is not an isolated case. There should be many infected people who have evolved in this way in the city. Su Tong poured a basin of cold water on the side again. A lot. How many? The ranger asked. Su Tong shook his head and did not give a standard answer, but gave him a reference. If the probability of evolution is 1000 to 1, you can do the math yourself. The ranger's mind was already buzzing when he thought of what they had seen through the surveillance cameras. The probability of 1 in 1,000 doesn't seem like much, but the huge base in the city is there. Thinking of this, the ranger can't help but gulp down, and there is a sense of despair in his heart. It's just the 9 of them who can fight against such an attack. What monsters! This is looking down on them too much. Do you really think they are supermen? Run away. In the silence, Ant Wang finally broke the silence. If you don't run away, you will die. As he spoke, he took out a key from the drawer and threw it to Su Tong. My car is opposite the park outside. I'll drive all the way there. As long as I go east, I can get out of the city in no time. The ranger's eyes lit up. As long as he rushed out of the city, everything would be easy. Even though the number of infected people outside may not be small, it is far from the huge base in cities. Coupled with their abilities, ordinary infected people can be easily eliminated. The worst thing is to hide in the mountains. I don't believe that these infected people can still travel across mountains and rivers to hunt them down. So the two began to pack their luggage in a hurry, ready to run away at any time. Buzz buzz. At this time, the cell phone in Su Tong's pocket suddenly rang. When he picked it up, he saw that it was a monkey. The call at this time gave him a bad premonition. After pressing the answer button, he heard the monkey's voice saying urgently, "Yunghui, I. Don't be anxious, speak slowly." The monkey opened its mouth tremblingly, but could not say a word. Yesterday you asked me to pay attention to the infected person. Today he actually transformed into a giant, just like the Hulk. I saw him punch one infected person today. It was too scary. Also, and I am hiding in the office of the building now. I heard someone crying last night, and they were standing at my door crying. Mentioning last night, the monkey seemed to have been greatly frightened. Then I heard a knock on the door. I hesitated for a long time. I didn't dare to open the door. As a result, there was a woman hiding next door. She opened the door, and then the monkey's voice had already begun to sob. Then just now, I looked through the crack of the door, and saw half of her hand, and the rest of her body was gone. I want to go home. On the other end of the phone, Monkey huddled in the corner, covering his mouth tightly with his hand, for fear that he wouldn't be able to bear it, and burst into tears. While he was talking, suddenly there was a bang in the corridor outside, which made the monkey immediately clenched his teeth and stared at the office door with his red eyes. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. It sounded like the sound of high heels hitting the ground, echoing in the corridor. At this time, the handle of the door was suddenly twisted hard and started to shake. Click, click, click. In an instant, Monkey's entire face turned pale, and he leaned tightly against the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. One hand was groping around, and he casually picked up a fire extinguisher in his hand, staring straight at the door. Fortunately, the door handle of the general manager's office was relatively high-end. After twisting the door hard for a few times, but still not pushing the door open, it seemed that he finally gave up and continued to twist the door handle. The footsteps of Tata Da gradually walked away from the door, and sounded like they were heading to the office next door. This time the monkey finally collapsed on the ground and breathed a long sigh of relief. He reached for his phone and said to Su Tong, "Brother, if I die, you must find my mother." After saying that, Monkey hung up the phone, stuffed the phone into his pocket, and was about to get up against the glass of the office. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, there were two strange sounds on the glass behind him. The monkey stiffened his neck and slowly turned around to look back. A woman's head appears behind the glass. The woman's face is round, her facial features are delicate, and she has a beauty mark in the corner of her eye. She has black framed eyes and looks like a professional elite, but her slender neck is from the other side. The window extended over, staring straight at him, and the corners of her red mouth gradually cracked in an exaggerated arc. "Hey, I found you, little mouse." Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 88. After hanging up the phone, Su Tong couldn't help but feel worried about the monkey. It just so happened that at this time, prompts came like a tidal wave. Main Mission 1, Survivors completed. The prop book function is unlocked, and you will randomly unlock a prop card. Side Mission 3, Hunting Mutants. Mission Goal, kill 3 mutated infected people. Mission Description, among the huge team of infected people, there are always a few infected people with a small probability of acquiring mutations. They devour their own kind and their strength increases rapidly. Kill them as soon as possible. Note, by killing the mutant, you can obtain his brain crystals, which is an unexpected gain. Special Identity Mission 1, Looking for Partners. Mission Goal, find the monkey. Mission Description, maybe you have already felt the concern of friendship, go find his whereabouts and bring a little afterglow to the end of the world. Note, there will be additional rewards for completing the identity mission. If you give up this identity mission, this quest line will end after 48 hours. The prop card randomly unlocked this time is Paper Craftsman's Book. As the cold reminder tone ended, Su Tong's eyes suddenly shone with a burning light. Finally! The unlocking of the papermaker's book finally ignited the fire in Su Tong's heart. The papermaker's book that he had longed for finally gave him the capital to gain a foothold in this apocalyptic world. It seems that this script has not really begun until this moment. Oops! The ranger on the side slapped the table and was so excited that he wanted to shout to the sky. It was not because he unlocked some key prop card. It's the unlocking of the props book that finally gives the slingshot a place to use. After all, the slingshot's lethality is limited, but if it can be matched with special projectiles, that's another story. Aunt Wang was obviously a little overwhelmed by the sudden changes between the two of them. She held Xiao Chenzi in one hand and Zhang Qiang in the other, guarding them behind her like an old hen, for fear that the two guys in front of her would suddenly become infected. "Don't worry, no infected person will be able to touch a hair of yours as long as I'm here." The ranger, who had regained most of his strength, had begun to feel arrogant and even arrogant. Su Tong calmed down quickly. After hearing the words of the ranger on the side, he couldn't help but asked in a low voice, "Is your identity mission to protect them?" The ranger nodded and shared his mission with Su Tong. Identity tasks can be shared, but there are no rewards mentioned in the tasks. Even so, there will still be some script points as rewards during settlement. Su Tong took a look and saw that he was indeed protecting them, but to be more precise, he was protecting the child Xiao Chenzi. Seeing this, he did not choose to accept, but refused the task. Looking at the ranger's confused eyes, Su Tong said, "I can cover you getting on the bus, but I can't be with you after getting on the bus." He wanted to find the monkey, whether it was out of his own heart or out of his identity and mission. He was always thinking about this strange little boy. Judging from the prompts given by the task, the monkey seems to be able to persist for 48 hours, so he still has enough time. Okay, but before that, we have to work together to kill the frog outside. The ranger also guessed that Su Tong was going to do an identity mission. Perhaps this was the best outcome. After all, he was playing the role of a bad guy. If bad guys and good guys were together, there would be no good results. At this time, Aunt Wang took Su Tong's arm, pulled him aside and whispered, "Are you sure you don't want to go with us? I also have a friend who is trapped in the post office building downtown, and I want to save him." Hearing Su Tong's words, Aunt Wang's words that she wanted to persuade him suddenly got stuck in her throat and she couldn't say anything. "You can't say, your friend might be dead, so just follow us." It seems so inhumane to say this, and if you can stop him so easily, then you have misjudged the person. Can he really believe it? Aunt Wang glanced at Yuxia and seemed to have no good impression of Yuxia from the beginning, so she asked Yuxia to go with them. Aunt Wang felt very uneasy. Su Tong nodded, "Don't worry, I don't think this guy will give up on you until the end of the road. You should understand the importance of identity tasks by thinking with your toes. If you fail to complete the identity tasks, you are likely to face punishment. In this apocalyptic world, let alone a sudden punishment, even for a small mistake, it might kill him." That's why he was so sure that Ranger was still trustworthy, but only if there was still a glimmer of hope. Hearing what he said, although Aunt Wang was reluctant, she still nodded in approval. "Get as much food and drink as you can." Aunt Wang pointed to the inventory in the supermarket and asked them to pick it up as they pleased. In fact, if Aunt Wang didn't say anything, the two of them would never let go of the opportunity to make supplements like this. 9 people is a small script that is infinitely close to the big script. This is just the beginning. Who knows how long we will survive here in the future? Food will become more scarce as we get later, so naturally the more the merrier. For this reason, Su Tong and Yuxia had to throw away many useless things in the prop book to free up the slots in the prop book to load these items. It was also at this time that Su Tong deeply realized how important the grid of the prop book was. The most important thing that the ranger packs is food. Whole bags of rice and flour are thrown into the prop book in order to maximize the rations. Su Tong was different. The thing he accepted the most was actually cigarettes, 5 large boxes in total. Those who didn't know better thought he was here to wholesale tobacco. When the ranger asked him why he took so many cigarettes, Su Tong just smiled mysteriously and patted him on the shoulder. "In my family, people like to call me the god of gamblers." After saying that, he ignored the questions on the ranger's head and threw the last 2 large boxes into the prop book. When Aunt Wang walked downstairs, she couldn't help but be dumbfounded when she looked at the counter that looked like a whirlwind of clouds. She looked left and right and didn't realize there were so many things. How did these 2 people disappear? Buzz, 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 babble, 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 babble. On the roof, bright red tongues darted in and out of the air from time to time, catching mosquitoes and falling into his mouth. There were no cars or buzzing sounds in the distant lanes, and the whole city was eerily quiet. However, if you listened carefully, you could occasionally hear someone scream in the wind blowing from a certain corner of the city. This piercing scream was no less than the sound of nature in his ears, and his huge frog-like eyes looked at the city with shining lights in the distance. The pair of palms full of barbs began to rub back and forth involuntarily, making a rustling sound. It's envy or curiosity. But he firmly restrained his desires, because he knew very well that the hunting ground was filled with too many competitors stronger than him, and it was definitely not a wise choice for him to rush into the hunting ground now. Wait, wait. The voice in his head kept reminding him to wait a little longer. After he killed all the prey and became stronger, it would be time for him to show off his skills. Thinking of this, his frog face first looked at the small room on the left side of the 7th floor with fear. Listening carefully, there seemed to be a baby crying in the room. It's just that he never had the courage to approach that house. Perhaps it was out of instinct, but there was always an aura of fear surrounding that house. Then he rolled his eyes and looked at the tin house that he was looking forward to. Smashing his mouth, he felt that there was a special smell in that house, which was so tempting that he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of spit every time he smelled it. This damn iron room doesn't seem to be that easy to break into. The two men inside made him feel dangerous. So he could only hope that his slaves could dig faster and dig a hole for him as soon as possible. Crash la la la. At this moment, the sound of the rolling shutter door interrupted his thoughts. When he lowered his head, he saw that the person in the iron jar had climbed out for the first time. Besides the two men, there was also the delicious food that he longed for. Two pairs of eyeballs rolled around and quickly locked on a boy. Yes, that alluring smell was emanating from the boy. He shook his body, and not long after, a thin layer of scales appeared on his skin. As he shook, he made sharp collision sounds. Suddenly, those quiet courtyards immediately became lively. A large number of infected people suddenly rushed out from the corner and rushed towards Su Tong and the others. Leave. At this time, Su Tong roared. Facing the infected people who came forward, Su Tong casually threw out all the pork on his body. The fresh pork immediately made these infected people step back. He picked up the pork on the ground and started to chew it. Of course, there were also many infected people who were not interested in pork. They rushed towards the five of them screaming. They preferred fresh living people to the frozen pork on the ground. Puff puff. The ranger raised his slingshot and shot 3 steel balls, each of which hit the infected person's eyeballs. However, this did not have much impact. It just made their bodies stiff and their movements slowed down. Fortunately, Su Tong followed behind and took advantage of the moment when their eyes were shot out to chop off the heads of these infected people with the big knife in his hand. The two of them cooperated perfectly, but even so, there were still some things that slipped through the net just by themselves. The purpose of these infected people is obvious, which is the two children behind Aunt Wang. Get away. Aunt Wang held a dumbbell bar in one hand and smashed it over. At one end of the dumbbell bar were 4 5-kilogram lever pieces. The stick swept over, like an $800 hammer. The infected person who just pounced on him must have suffered 8 lifetimes of bad luck. Even the fortune tellers didn't expect that he would still be able to enjoy such a thunderous blow after death. Bang, there was a muffled sound, and blood and minced meat were mixed together and splashed out. Broken bones and intestines were also splashed out, and everything was smashed in half. Before the remaining infected people could pounce on them, they were thrown away by Aunt Wang's stick, which followed closely behind. Then he picked up Xiaochunzi beside him with one hand and limped towards the low wall on the left. There is only one entrance to the yard, but the low wall on the left is where children are often lazy and want to take shortcuts. They usually climb up and down the garbage cans, and climb over the wall and walk through the woods, which is where Aunt Wang usually parks her car. Place. It was obvious that this route was carefully planned by them. The entrance became smaller as they walked further in. The infected people crowded into a group and wanted to pounce on them, but they were forced to retreat due to the cooperation of Su Tong and Ranger. Quick! Jump down! Seeing the trash can close at hand, Aunt Wang struggled to get up, turned over, jumped down with her eyes closed, and actually landed firmly on the ground. After the ant climbed over the wall, looked around and made sure it was safe, she urged the two children to jump down immediately. The two children hesitated for a moment, and when they were about to jump up, a frog face quietly appeared on the wall of a building nearby, smiled strangely at them, opened his mouth suddenly, and stuck out a thick and powerful tongue from his mouth. Come out and shoot at Xiaochunzi quickly. However, his inevitable blow failed to catch the child. Instead, he was caught by Su Tong's hand. You're the one waiting for me. Su Tong raised his head and sneered at the frog-faced man, as if he had been waiting for him for a long time. Excellent hunters often appear as prey. In order to lure this guy to the bait, they have been rehearsing in the supermarket for a long time. Even Xiaochunzi and Zhang Qiang were forced to become Su Tong's training targets. And all this is to lure this guy into taking the bait. I saw Su Tong waving his palm, tightly grasping the guy's tongue, and activating devil power at the same time. Suddenly, a ball of blue flames quickly burned along the slender tongue. Good night. Oh, it's already 4:20, so good morning. I'll finish watching it during dinner. Can you give me a ticket? Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 89. Boom. The blue fire suddenly lit up in the darkness like a long dragon. It is said that 10 fingers are connected to the heart, but little did they know that the sensitivity of the tongue is 1,000 times better than that of the fingers. The piercing burning sensation immediately made Frogface scream in pain, but he actually chose to bite off his tongue at the first moment, turned around and wanted to escape. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. In the darkness, 3 marbles suddenly exploded with silver current in front of Frogface, forming an electric grid that wrapped around him in an instant. Ah! Thousands of volts of electricity, even for a short time, still made Frogface twitch and fall from the air. It was also at this moment that he discovered that all the slaves he had tamed had been killed without knowing when. Gotta be clean. His wisdom was destined to be unable to understand why their strength suddenly increased so much, but a deep sense of fear had spread from his heart. It was precisely under the stimulation of this fear that Frogface actually evolved again in mid-air. A pair of thin flesh wings grew under his ribs. As his arms spread out, a strong wind blew up and he was about to fly into the sky. If you want to run away, there is no way. Seeing that the fat in his mouth was about to fly away, the ranger's face turned cold, and he waved his hand and threw a dagger into the air. Frogface twisted his body slightly, and the dagger jumped directly past him. He glanced at Su Tong and the others with resentful eyes, and flapped his wings to escape. However, Frogface probably never dreamed that the moment he turned around, the ranger who was still on the ground would appear behind him the next moment. This is exactly the ability that comes with the third prop card unlocked in the ranger main line. Shining Dagger. After throwing it, it consumes 3 script points to flash to the position of the dagger in a short distance. Cooling time, 2 hours. The dagger he dodged was held in the hand of the ranger. He jumped down in the air and stabbed his eye socket with his backhand. Puff. The sudden change caused Frogface to struggle crazily, his tentacles dancing wildly, and his sharp claws scratching forward, trying to tear the bastard in front of him into pieces. How could the ranger give it this chance? A cold and cruel light flashed in his eyes. He successfully struck and kicked Frogface's chest. At the same time, the spear appeared in his hand. With a backhand throw, the spear penetrated Frogface's chest with a huge impact, shooting him directly back to the ground from mid-air. Brute. Just in the direction where he fell, Ant Wang, who was looking at him eagerly, saw the hammer consisting of a dumbbell rod and dumbbell plates, rounded by Ant Wang, and hit the guy's head with one hammer. Crack. Body fluids mixed with brain matter were splashing everywhere, and it looked like a rotten orange that had been stepped on alive. Pooh. Looking at the body lying on the ground, Ant Wang spat fiercely, which was regarded as revenge for Xiao Sun. Su Tong climbed over the low wall with the two children in his arms, walked to Frogface's body and took a look. He saw something shining dimly inside the broken flesh. So he reached out and took it out. It was a crystal the size of a fingernail. As soon as he threw it into the prop book, a line of notes appeared in front of him. Evolver Brain Crystal, Special Props, Temporary. Among the large number of infected people, there are always a few who have opened the key to the door of evolution. This small brain crystal is the basis for their future domination of the world, containing pure and flawless power. Usage: eat directly. After eating it, you may randomly obtain an ability of the evolver, or your own physical quality may be improved. Note, whether it is the evolved ability or the improvement of one's own physical quality, they are all temporary effects. If you want to obtain this effect permanently, please pay attention to the subsequent tasks. It still has such an effect. After seeing the effect of this brain crystal, Su Tong suddenly realized it. Seeing that the ranger had climbed over the wall and walked over, he casually threw the brain crystal to the ranger. After all, the ranger is the real killer. If you participate by yourself and get a side mission indicator, you can already make money. Besides, apart from the pair of flesh wings, he doesn't like any other abilities of the frog-faced man. The ranger took a look at the brain crystal, and his face suddenly showed joy. Seeing that Su Tong had no intention of occupying this thing, he felt relieved and threw a prop to him. This is a rule. If I take something, I have to compensate it. Su Tong took it and saw that it was something like a glass bead. A one-time prop, it may be able to help you at a critical moment. This is a one-time prop called a camouflage ball. After use, it can temporarily enter a fully invisible state for 15 seconds. During this period, you cannot move or make any sound. It's an inconspicuous prop, and it can be regarded as a little help given to him by the ranger. Su Tong was not polite and took it directly. After all, he was going to save people, and this kind of thing might come in handy. After thanking the ranger, they did not dare to delay and quickly walked through the woods. At a glance, I saw Ant Wang's dark black Havel Great Wall Cannon parked on the side of the road. Its wide and solid body gave people a sense of solid security from a distance. In fact, Su Tong didn't recommend them to drive out, but after careful consideration, they still chose to drive. When the first virus broke out, it was still 6 o'clock in the morning, and there weren't many cars in the driveway. Secondly, it is very close to the elevated road. As long as the car is on the elevated road and the speed increases, the scattered infected people cannot stop it at all. And after all, walking out of the city with children is far more risky than driving. In addition, they have players like rangers to protect them, so the hope of getting out is still very high. At this time, Su Tong suddenly understood why someone chose to drive away that morning. In fact, their choice was right, but the mistake was that their location was not good. Zai, are you sure you don't want to follow us? There is an elevated road 300 meters ahead. Once we reach the elevated road, we can hope to escape. Please think about it again. Before getting in the car, Ant Wang tried to persuade him one more time, but after being decisively rejected by Su Tong, Ant Wang had no choice but to give up the idea. At this time, the ranger whispered in Su Tong's ear. My identity mission reminded me to take them east. There may be a protected area there. If you escape, go east. I estimate that other players will also have their ultimate goal to go there. Rush on the side. Goodbye, uncle. The two children waved goodbye to Su Tong through the car window. They were still young and couldn't understand why their uncle didn't want to go with them. Su Tong waved his hand, turned around and escaped into the darkness. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Aunt Wang glanced at the slightly white sky in the distance, took out a shining gold medal from her chest with one hand, put it to her mouth, kissed it, and reached out to press it. Press the start button, and with the hum of the car engine starting, you kick the accelerator and drive the car towards the main road. Clatter. Water droplets dripped down on the paint bucket along the cracks of the colored steel tiles, and quickly evaporated under the high temperature of the sun in the blink of an eye. On a hot day of 40 degrees Celsius, even infected people have to hide in corners. Because sunlight will not replenish calcium for them, but will only speed up their decay. An infected person huddled in the shadows, motionless as if asleep. He didn't wake up suddenly until he heard the sound of footsteps in his ears. However, as soon as his head popped up, a big knife cut him in the face. Dark red blood spattered on the wall. Su Tong kicked the head aside and looked up at the approximately 30-story post office building not far away. He tried to take out his cell phone, but there was no signal at all. It seems that since this morning, the mobile phone signal has been lost. After taking a look at the fire exit on the left, Su Tong hesitated and chose to take the main entrance. When the virus broke out, it was around 6:30 in the morning. It is said that not many people actually went to work, but don't forget, those who go to work at 9 o'clock are often regular workers. This is not the time for informal workers. In my memory, Monkey made an appointment with him to come here as a sorter. He paid 180 a day and even took care of your lunch. It's okay now, let alone the 180 yuan that I haven't seen, I will become someone else's meal. This is also the reason why they go through the main entrance hall. Sorters usually go straight to the warehouse through the backdoor staff passage, so taking the hall can avoid a large number of infected people. As soon as he entered the door, two infected people wearing security uniforms rushed towards Su Tong. Just becoming infected cannot change their old constitution. Su Tong raised his hand and struck with the knife. After cutting off the left side of the head, he ducked sideways and waved his hand, using a silver foil folded flying knife to strike from another infected person. The person's eyebrows penetrated out, whirled in the air, and then spun around Su Tong. This is the upgraded paper control technique. Not only can he control paper figures, he can also control paper products. Coupled with a 50% increase in control ability, it is tantamount to making him even more powerful in control. Note, as for whether silver foil paper is classified as metal or paper, there is no need to delve into this point. Paper in paper control can be understood more broadly as items that are paper within the scope that people recognize. You can't go through the fire escape. I remember what Monkey said in his last text message, that it was densely packed with infected people, so the only way to go upstairs was to take the elevator. Ding! As the elevator door slowly opened, a disgusting smell of blood hit the face. The elevator was covered with blood, and the smooth walls around it were covered with dense bloody handprints. Seeing this, Su Tong frowned and stepped into the elevator. Looking at the blood-stained buttons, he hesitated and chose the 25th floor. The building has a total of 32 floors. Even if the monkey climbed down from the roof, it would never be that deep. Starting from the 25th floor, the probability of finding the monkey would be the highest. As the elevator door began to rise slowly, Su Tong held the knife in one hand and was ready to call the fat man out at any time. 10th floor, 15th floor. At this time, a cry suddenly started coming from the elevator, a hoarse sobbing sound, like the voice of a little girl, which seemed to get closer and closer as the elevator went up. Hearing the cry, his heart skipped a beat, remembering that the monkey's phone call seemed to mention this cry. What surprised him even more was that the elevator suddenly stopped on the 17th floor. Ding! As the elevator door slowly opened, the crying outside the door was getting closer and closer, and suddenly a gray-white face popped its head out. It was the face of a little girl with two pigtails and two gray-white pupils scanning the elevator in front of her. However, when she saw that there was no one in the elevator, the little girl turned around with a disappointed look. At the same time, it also exposed her huge body behind her. It was a body pieced together with densely packed hands and feet, including men's hands and feet, and some women's, crawling forward on the ground like a centipede. Looking at the monster turning away, Su Tong in the corner breathed a cautious sigh of relief. The monster in front of him completely exceeded his expectations. It seems that the speed of monster mutation is also increasing day by day, and it is no longer limited to human appearance. Just as the 15 seconds of invisibility time is about to disappear, the elevator door finally begins to close slowly. But at the moment when the elevator closed, the centipede monster in front of him actually had a man's head on his butt. He opened his eyes and met Su Tong face to face. The two little eyes looked at each other blankly for a moment, as if they hadn't expected that someone would suddenly pop out of the empty elevator. Su Tong looked at the man's face and twitched his eye. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 90. Boom. The entire elevator shook, and the angry roar seemed to echo in his ears. Fortunately, the quality of the elevator is very good. After shaking twice, the elevator actually started to rise again. I have to say that the money was spent well and the quality is good. But he was obviously happy a little too early. Just listen to boom, a huge abnormal sound was heard, and then the entire elevator suddenly sank. A living person. A living person. The man's roar and the girl's scream mixed together and came from the bottom of the elevator. It was obvious that the centipede monster was on the elevator at the moment. Kaka kaka. With the sound of metal tearing, Su Tong watched the marble floor tiles under his feet begin to crack and open. He tensed up, raised the big knife in his hand, and stabbed it hard into the ground. Poof, the blade pierced along the gap, as if it had stabbed something, but the elevator shook more violently, and then the elevator finally stopped on the 25th floor. Ding. Seeing the elevator door slowly opening, Su Tong pulled out his machete, pressed the first floor and door closing buttons, and immediately jumped out of the elevator. Click. A slender arm stretched out from under the elevator floor, scratching frantically in the elevator. The skin of that hand looked very white and delicate, and there was a diamond ring on the slender fingers, like a woman's hand. However, such a weak-looking little hand actually smashed through the hard marble, cracking the ground in a few clicks. More and more arms explored in. As the elevator door slowly closed, Su Tong you can still hear the screams of men and women. Where is it? Where is it? Where is the meat? Looking at the elevator slowly descending to the floor, before he could breathe a sigh of relief, his body suddenly stiffened and he slowly turned his head. Da-da-da-da, the sound of the keyboard echoed in the office area in front of me. Standing up carefully, Su Tong glanced sideways at the desk in front of him and saw a fat man sitting in front of the computer with his back to him. His 10 fingers had split into slender little tentacles, tapping crazily. Keyboard. The plastic bags of various snacks and drinks on the table were piled as high as a hill, no different from a garbage dump. The fat man was still muttering in his mouth, don't rush, hurry up, hurry up. He glanced at Fatty's monitor and found that the monitor had been turned off a long time ago and the computer was not turned on at all. Seeing this, Su Tong shook his head. What an evil capitalism, people have died and become infected, yet they are still working hard. Work overtime. Ignoring the hard-working fat man, Su Tong looked at the desks in front of him and searched carefully, but could not find any trace of the monkey. Just when he was about to try to take the fire escape to see if he could go up one level, the sound of the keyboard behind him suddenly stopped. Su Tong turned around suspiciously and looked behind him. The fat man who had been typing on the keyboard just now stood up with a dull look on his face. His honest face was covered with veins and bloodshot eyes. His eyes had neither whites nor pupils. It turned completely into deep black. Looking at Su Tong, his expression became more and more distorted. I said, I don't work overtime, I don't want to work overtime, but you want me to work overtime. The fat man became more and more excited as he talked, and his already fat body actually inflated like a balloon. Kaka kaka. It was originally a loose, large-sized short-sleeved shirt, but it burst open in the blink of an eye. Su Tong never dreamed that he would still see a fat man bursting out of his clothes in his lifetime. I want to go home, I want to play games, I want to eat, I want to sleep. The fat man became more and more excited as he talked, and his body was rapidly expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. It split into countless tentacles, crackling and shattering the surrounding tables. The two pairs of dark eyes actually began to flash red. It's all your fault, it's all your fault. His belly began to be covered with stretch marks like those of a pregnant woman, and he felt like he was about to explode. He kept complaining about the unfairness he had suffered. It's been 3 years and I still haven't been given a promotion or raise. That new bitch was promoted to supervisor in just 1 month. Did you sleep with her? The fat man's roar did not allow him to vent all the resentment in his heart, as his huge body gradually approached the ceiling. Click. The familiar sound of a can opening made the fat man suddenly quiet down. He lowered his head and saw Su Tong standing in front of him, holding a bottle of Coke in one hand and a pile of snacks in the other. That, your takeaway. Su Tong came forward holding snacks and said. Seeing the fat boy's happy water in his hand, Fatty was stunned for a moment, his flashing red eyes immediately extinguished, and his big and honest face smiled. Oh, okay, okay. A strong stream of air blew the tables and chairs behind him around, and his body was like a deflated ball, returning to its normal physique in the blink of an eye. The slender tentacles caught all the snacks in his arms. After taking a sip of Coke happily, his chubby face was full of satisfaction. Sure enough, the 3 treasures of otakus are computers, AV, and happy water. Delicious, delicious. Seeing the fat man holding a pile of snacks and eating happily, Su Tong pinched his nose, walked to the window and opened it, saying at the same time, eat, eat, it's all yours, it's not enough. I still have. He walked slowly behind the fat man, looked at the fat man's head, and calmly clenched the big knife in his hands with both hands. Give. At this time, the fat man suddenly turned around and put a bag of potato chips in front of him. Yours. Su Tong was stunned for a moment, looking at the big fat face with a silly smile in front of him. He slowly removed his palm from the handle of the knife, took the fat man's snacks, and looked at the fat man again. The fat man ate happily, a mouthful of potato chips and a mouthful of happy water. He had absolutely no desire to eat other infected people. And he seems to retain a little bit of intelligence. Judging from his performance just now, there is no doubt that this guy is an evolver, but he is completely different from Frogface and the centipede monster he encountered on the 17th floor. He simply sat aside and waited for the fat man to finish all the snacks, and then took out a lot of snacks for the fat man. Seeing so many snacks, the fat man was obviously very happy. He moved his slender tentacles, easily tore open the snack packaging bag, and stuffed it into his stomach like a bottomless pit with his big mouth. After taking a few bites, the fat man suddenly stopped. Su Tong's heart tightened and he put one hand behind his back. Don't go down there. However, the fat man didn't mean to attack him, but pointed to the ground with a mysterious look on his face. What? Seeing that Su Tong didn't understand, the fat man continued, the leader is below, don't let him see you, he is very bad. How bad is it? Seeing how cute the fat man was, Su Tong couldn't help but start teasing him. This question made Fatty think deeply for a long time, but his current intelligence seemed unable to describe how bad this leader was. He just stuffed the snack into his mouth, his bulging face looked like an inflated bun, and said angrily, it's bad anyway. Since you are so bad, then you and I should go together. I still have many snacks. Seeing that the fat man seemed to be able to take advantage of him, Su Tong tried to seduce him. After all, this fat man seems to be very good at fighting, and he seems to be able to self-destruct. If used well, he may be a good helper. The fat man hesitated for a moment and looked back at the computer desk he smashed. Don't look at it. The computers have been smashed. You will only be bullied if you stay here. Follow me. I will be your good big brother. Whatever you want to eat in the future, I will buy it for you. The smile on Su Tong's face is friendly and sunny, perfectly interpreting how the big bad wolf lures Little Red Riding Hood to eat a lollipop. In fact, he could see that Fatty's so-called job was just the resentment left in his mind when he was alive. Now he wouldn't understand what he was doing, otherwise the computer would be shut down and the keyboard he typed would be meaningless no matter how fast he typed it. As long as I lure his attention from work to eating and drinking, it will be a success. After all, eating is people's greatest desire. Seeing that the fat man was still hesitating, he could only use his trump card. Look, there are no snacks here. What will you do after eating these? Do you still want to drink Coke? Hearing Coke, the fat man was finally moved. He looked at the bottomed Coke can in his hand and hesitantly raised 2 fingers toward him, 2 cans a day. I'll give you 4 cans. Look. Look. Su Tong stretched out his fingers and entangled them with the fat man's slender tentacles. He felt happy and suddenly felt that in this doomsday, maybe it wasn't so bad after all. After all, 4 cans of Coke are exchanged for a gold medal fighter. Is there any better deal in the world than this? Eat, continue to eat after eating. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 91. Kaka, Kaka. In the dark corridor, there was a sound of gnawing from time to time. Several infected people in suits were forming a circle, hugging the body of a companion wearing blue overalls on the ground and starting to eat. The head of the eaten infected person shook from time to time, as if struggling. But the limbs had long been chewed clean, and struggling was obviously useless. Ah! Ah! When he saw someone reaching for his head, the other infected person immediately became angry, screamed and opened the other person's hand, then picked up his head, opened his mouth and gnawed down. The other infected people wanted to fight when they saw this, but they seemed to be very afraid of him. They only dared to gather around and let out low roars. But that's all they dared to do. The infected person at the head still went his own way and had no intention of giving them a single star. Even while chewing, he glanced at the other companions. Seemingly aware of the danger, the 2 infected people turned around and left, leaving only the other 2 infected people still waiting, hoping to get some scraps. Ah! Suddenly, a piercing scream came from the corridor, like the screams of the 2 infected people who had just left. The 3 infected people quickly raised their heads and looked at the steps downstairs. In the deep darkness, suddenly it got quiet. Boom! Throwing away the half-eaten head, the leader of the infected stared into the darkness with dark green eyes, vaguely seeming to see something. Just when he raised his head to see more clearly, puff, puff, puff. Several slender tentacles surged out of the darkness in an instant, like pythons, and quickly wrapped his head. Group, and then quickly pulled into the darkness. The whole process went smoothly, and the infected person didn't even have a chance to struggle. This time there was not even a scream, only a rattling sound could be heard, and the corridor suddenly became quiet. Suddenly, the two infected people were left holding the remaining bitten head on the ground, and disappeared in a hurry. He ran away without a trace. He ran pretty fast. After a while, Su Tong and Big Fatty came up. Big Fatty was holding a bag of potato chips in his hands. He ate each piece carefully, sniffing it first, then licking it, and finally putting it on the tip of his tongue and putting it into his mouth. Inside, he tasted it delicately and looked at the intoxicated expression on his face. It would be a loss to the food circle not to be a food judge. Looking at the corpses on the ground with their heads removed, he couldn't help but feel worried. It was said that there were not many infected people in this building. But the number of evolvers far exceeds that of Tongzilu. Not only that, but the centipede monster and the fat man we just encountered were among the stronger levels of evolvers at this stage. Now even ordinary infected people are beginning to devour other companions to quickly increase their strength. If I said before that the probability of being an evolver is 1 in 1,000, then in this place, the probability is probably not just 1 in 1,000, but even 1 in 100. This couldn't help but remind him of the word goo. This building is a goo altar for raising goo. The narrow space and limited food make the infected here evolve much faster than the outside world. Thinking of this, he turned back and glanced at the fat man behind him. Seeing him holding potato chips and eating them with relish, he couldn't help but curiously asked, "They like to chew their heads. Don't you like to chew them?" In fact, he was also very curious in his heart, whether the fat man was an evolved person or an ordinary infected person. Call him an infected person. He has completely mutated. Whether it is his slender tentacles or his ability to self-destruct, it is obviously not something ordinary infected people can have. But if you want to say that he is an evolved person, Fatty doesn't seem to be interested in the heads of these infected people at all. Even after twisting off the heads of the 3 infected people just now, there was no desire to even take a look. This was completely different from the evolvers he had learned about. "Don't eat it, it stinks." The fat man looked at the corpse on the ground, and his face was full of disgust. Yes, he is obviously an evolving person with ambitions. Unable to figure out how the fat man became an evolver, Su Tong simply stopped thinking about it. He had more important things to do, and he had to find the monkey as soon as possible. When Su Tong thought of monkeys, many memory fragments of him and the monkeys playing together popped up in Su Tong's mind, although he knew that these memory fragments were deliberately implanted into him by the space. But I still couldn't help but feel worried for the monkey. In addition to being better at climbing than ordinary people, this guy's fighting ability is not as good as that of an ordinary person. He is so thin that when he hits that stick, it feels like a gust of wind can blow him down. Coupled with the lack of food and water, this building is like a voodoo garden. The monkeys are worse than mice, and any infected person can kill him. Thinking of this, Su Tong couldn't help but speed up his pace. After climbing to the 26th floor, I opened the door and saw that it was actually a warehouse. After searching carefully for a while, I found no trace of the monkey at all. Just as he was about to leave with the fat man, he suddenly found several large boxes standing in the corner. What attracted him was not the boxes, but the signs on the boxes that read flammable and explosive. Is it some kind of contraband? Su Tong's eyes lit up. In the current national situation, not to mention getting bombs and toy guns, you will be sentenced to prison. Even if he wanted to buy these weapons, he had no place to buy them. Seeing the words flammable and explosive at this moment, Su Tong's heart moved. He led the fat man forward and motioned to the fat man to start opening the box. This kind of trivial matter is not a problem for the fat man at all. The slender tentacles are attached to the box, and with a slight twist and pull, a click-click sound is heard, and the sealed wooden box outside the box suddenly becomes torn apart. Following the fat man's movements several times, it was as simple as breaking off corns, and the outer layer of the wooden box was completely removed. After removing the outer wooden box, there is still a layer of black boxes inside. There was a big lock hanging on the box, but how could this thing stop him? He didn't even need to take action, he just slashed through it with his knife and broke the lock of the box. With curiosity and expectation, he placed his hands lightly on the box, slowly opened the box and took a closer look. Suddenly the smile on Su Tong's face froze. Even he didn't expect to see such a thing in such a place. His eyes were blank for a moment, he closed the box again, looked at the sign on the ground that said flammable and explosive, and thought to himself. It is indeed flammable and explosive. Who would have thought that in such a gorgeous building warehouse, there would be such a box of imported inflatable girlfriends? Are you planning to give employees benefits during the Chinese New Year? Just when he was about to stand up and leave, he suddenly turned around and looked sideways at the fat man behind him, and then looked at the inflatable girlfriends. Huh. Not sure what he was thinking of, Su Tong tilted his head and looked at Big Fat, his eyes gradually narrowed into a slit, and tentatively asked, "Fatty, do you want to work overtime?" Wow! The large package of potato chips suddenly fell to the floor. When he heard the word overtime, his fat eyes began to flash red. At the same time, the sun on the street outside the building is no longer as fierce as it was at noon. But it was still unbearably hot. Quick, there's no one. A group of people, holding steel pipes and kitchen knives, carefully poked their heads out of the grass. After confirming that there were no infected people on the street, they crawled out of the grass and walked quickly along the street. They were survivors in a nearby community. They were lucky enough to avoid going out during the first wave of the virus outbreak, thus escaping the most chaotic period. Relying on the little food left at home, I suffered from hunger until today, and I discovered that these infected people seem to hate the sun. Especially at noon in the season, it won't come out at all. In addition, they usually use the wall to surf the internet in the middle of the night, and they had already developed a skill that allowed them to escape from the school easily. Old Lee. The world is over, what should we do next? The man walking in front was talking as he walked. The middle-aged man in the lead had exaggerated green hair and a killer look. When he heard this, he said with a nonchalant expression, "It's over when it's over. I wish he was over woolen cloth. But, I want to go home. I miss my mother." When someone mentioned this, other people's eyes couldn't hold tight. Even Lao Li, who was walking in front, had red eyes, but he didn't dare to cry. He knew that this was not the time to cry. He had to find a place before dark. A safe haven. Just when he was about to speak, a baby's cry suddenly came. Child. They were startled. How could there be a baby crying at this time? Looking up in doubt, Xiaoming, who was suddenly following behind, saw at a glance, under the shade of the postal building, a woman covered in black clothes. The woman wore a black top hat and a lace dress. Was sitting there with a baby in his arms. It's a survivor. Their eyes lit up, and they finally saw a living person, and they hurriedly ran in the direction of the woman, wanting to ask her if she wanted to go with them. Hey, what if it's... A student was following behind. He hesitated, took their arms and whispered, "What if it's those monsters?" Monster? If it were a monster, the baby would have been chewed clean long ago. Lao Li waved his hand disapprovingly, and others heard the same thing. Big sister, why are you sitting here? Do you want to come with me? Lao Li stepped forward and shouted. The woman was stunned for a moment, then raised her head, her pale face highlighted her scarlet lips, she smiled, and shook her head, "My child is hungry." "Oh, but we..." Lao Li touched his pocket. There was a piece of ham in his pocket, but he hesitated and still didn't take it out. He could only smile bitterly and said, "Sorry, we don't have much food. Why don't you come with us first?" The woman shook her head and looked at the baby who was crying harder in her arms. She looked at Lao Li and others, and the smile on her lips became more charming. "No, aren't you just the food delivered to your door?" Old Li was startled. Before he could understand what the woman meant, he saw the woman suddenly raise her hand and pierce a sharp nail directly into his head. "There are 2 hours left, I'll try my best to go as fast as possible, Ollie, Rush the Duck." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 92. Hey hey hey, don't be angry. Brother is just joking with you. Can I give you a Coke? What's not enough? 2 bottles. 4 bottles. That's it? Looking at the fat boy with his mouth pouted, Su Tong could only coax him patiently like he was coaxing a baby. After all, such an easy-to-use gold medal thug couldn't just run away like this. Hearing that Su Tong had raised the price to 4 bottles, a smile appeared on the big fat face, but his slender fingers rubbed back and forth, almost twisting into a bow, and whispered, "I want bottled ones." "Stop talking nonsense, I'm talking about barrels." As soon as he heard this, the big fat man immediately danced with excitement, and the unhappiness he felt just now disappeared. However, Su Tongxiao said, "It's inconvenient for you to hold it now. I'll keep it for you first. When will you drink it?" "What's the matter? Ask me for it when the time comes." Su Tong was afraid that he wouldn't believe it, so he took out 4 large barrels of Coke. The heavy weights were placed there. It was easy for the fat man to pick it up, but it was indeed a bit inconvenient to move around. He was always afraid of bumping into it. It was damaged. So the simple fat man could only leave these Cokes to Su Tong for safekeeping. After putting away all those nerdy girlfriends, Su Tong took Big Fat and headed straight to the 27th floor, thinking, "Fortunately, Big Fat has taken care of some snacks, otherwise there really wouldn't be room for so many dolls." There are indeed some infected people in the corridor, but with Big Fat by his side, he doesn't even need to use prop cards, and he doesn't even need to lift the knife, leaving everything to Big Fat to take care of. When he opened the door to the 27th floor, he discovered that this floor was actually connected to the 28th floor, a 2-story duplex structure. The floor was a thick wool carpet. The marble walls, crystal chandeliers, and even the plaster lines of the chandeliers are all luxuriously covered with gold foil. The logo of an insurance company hangs on the wall. The mahogany sofas and chairs not far away form a leisure tea tasting area, and there are actually rock eries and fountains beside it. The oversized floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of almost half of the city. What a luxury, he couldn't help but sigh. The purple sand tea set on the table is probably equivalent to the annual income of an ordinary person. In fact, although the building belongs to the postal service, of course it is impossible to use all of such a large building by myself. In fact, only the lower floors, warehouses, and front rooms facing the street are used for offices. As for the luxurious offices upstairs, or the double-floor duplex like this, they are all for rent. Of course, the rent is not cheap. The annual rent often starts at 1 million, with no ceiling, and repairs are not included. This is why you see these office buildings with bank signs on them, but they are not very tall or big. They used the money they saved to build a building, and then used the income generated by the building to repay the interest. From beginning to end, they didn't touch a penny, and they already had hundreds of millions of assets. Therefore, it is so easy for capitalists to get money. After taking a look at the blood on the ground, Su Tong put the big knife on his shoulder, holding a paper silver foil flying knife in one hand, and searched around the downstairs with Big Fatty. The results were very strange. There were blood stains everywhere in the offices downstairs, but not even a single infected person, let alone corpses. This made Su Tong alert, and he took Big Fat directly to the 2nd floor. Although there was no wool blanket on the second floor, the smooth marble was as bright as new. It looked like it had been waxed and had been maintained not long ago. The two first pushed open the doors of several offices, but found no trace of the monkey. When they turned around, they saw the general manager's sign hanging on the innermost door. Su Tong pushed the door open and entered. I saw several huge fish tanks. These fish tanks are as small as 2 meters long and 1 meter high. The big one even reached the roof, with a length of 6 meters. The fish tank was decorated with various rockery plants. In addition to the precious arowana, there were also some ornamental fish that he couldn't even name. There was even a small shark swimming freely in the fish tank. The huge office is better said to be a small aquarium. Ah! Suddenly the fat man following him let out a scream, covered his head with his hands, turned around and hid next to the cabinet. Su Tong was startled by his voice, but when he turned around, there was nothing. Bad guy. The fat man pointed with a tiny tentacle at the large desk. He looked in the direction pointed by the fat man and saw a huge oil painting hanging on the wall. It was a bust. It could be concluded that the author's skills were very high. The eyes and charm of the middle-aged man in the portrait are perfectly outlined, with his meticulous hairstyle and neat black suit. The portrait is so detailed that even the stripes on the suit are clearly shown. Such a vivid portrait should be the appearance of the evil boss in Big Fatty's mouth. No wonder it scares Big Fatty. What are you afraid of? I have a big brother. Seeing the fat man hiding in the corner, trembling, Su Tong felt angry, so he picked up the teacup on the table and poured a cup of tea on it. He doesn't know how to do art, but he is best at destroying things. After pouring a cup of tea, Su Tong looked at the neat set of white shirts in the closet. He raised his brows slightly, gently picked up one with his fingers and put it on his hand to admire it carefully. Then he waved it casually as if he smeared it on the oil painting like a rag. While wiping, he hummed a tune, "There is an old man ding who owes me 2 eggs. He said he would pay me back in 3 days. It's been 4 days and I haven't paid it back." This sentence was not sung by Su Tong. He was stunned for a moment, then looked back at Big Fatty, seeing him staring at the oil painting, and seeing Su Tong looking at him, with a smile on his honest face, and they both said together, "Go to hell, you big bastard." Ha ha ha. As soon as he applied it, the oil painting in front of him changed its appearance in an instant. Suddenly, there was a strange sound outside the door. Immediately afterwards, the footsteps of Tata de Da were heard, echoing on the marble floor outside the door. Hearing the footsteps getting closer and closer, it seemed that the doors of other rooms were still being pushed open. Su Tong quickly reached out and grabbed the big fat man. The two of them hid behind the big fish tank in the corner and waited quietly. Click. An office door was violently pushed open and then slammed shut again. I saw white high-heeled shoes, walking lightly, walking towards the door of the general manager's office step by step, and placed my fingers lightly on the door handle. With a slight twist, click, the door was pushed open slowly and gently. Su Tong poked out half of his head and took a look. The first thing that came into view was the woman's hand on the doorknob. It was a rare beautiful hand, with narrow and slender fingers, yet plump and white. There is a hazy green light on the nails, which makes people have countless reveries at the first sight. Dressed in red business attire, a woman walked in carrying a box. The woman's face was covered by long hair, and she could smell a faint scent of perfume from a distance. The woman walked to the fish tank and sprinkled the contents of the box into the fish tank. A closer look revealed that what she was holding was actually fish food. Humanity. This idea was rejected by Su Tong within less than a second in his mind. At this time, there are still people who want to feed fish. Can such people be normal? What's more, there are blood stains everywhere on this floor, but there is not even an infected person or even a corpse. Did all the infected people run downstairs? Therefore, this woman cannot be a normal human being, and is most likely an evolved person. The woman's next move immediately confirmed his suspicion. I saw the woman scattering fish food in the fish tank, lowering her head to look at a golden dragon, looking around as if to determine if there was anyone, and then she suddenly reached out and grabbed it into the fish tank. She opened her palm, and saw a big mouth split open in her palm. She rolled her tongue out, and a huge arowana was drawn directly into her mouth. The sound of gruck, grack was heard, and the entire fish tank was suddenly stained red with blood. Hey hey! Looking at the golden dragon being bitten into pieces, the woman let out a low sneer. However, after hearing the woman's voice, the fat man who had always lowered his head suddenly lost his composure. He slowly raised his head, stared at the woman's back, his eyes began to glow red, and yelled, "Bitch!" A loud roar came out of the fat man's mouth. The woman didn't move, but her head turned directly around. Her delicate face wore professional black-rimmed glasses, and there was a standard beauty mark in the corner of her eye. She couldn't be said to be charming, but she was. Take the pure professional route. But when she turned around, I believed that no man would have the slightest illusion about her anymore. Her chest and collar were open, but what was exposed was not the beautiful scenery of the mountains, but the distorted faces, and a bloody mouth full of inverted teeth. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 93. Madness. Looking at the fat man standing up, Su Tong cursed in his heart. Standing up at this time, there was no chance of a sneak attack. Huh. Seeing the fat man, the woman's eyes flashed. However, after she carefully examined the fat man, her face was full of disappointment and she said disdainfully, "I thought you finally turned over, but I didn't expect that you would evolve after you died. You are so weak, you deserve to be a tool for the rest of your life." Su Tong, who was hiding under the fish tank, felt his heart skip a beat when he heard this. This woman's strength seemed to be far stronger than she looked. Not only could she tell the depth of her fatness at a glance, her contemptuous sneer seemed to be completely different. Take him seriously. How many evolvers are hidden in such a small ghost place? Su Tong couldn't help complaining in his heart. Compared with Tongzilu, there were only one frog-faced man among so many infected people, and the strength of the frog-faced man was even far inferior to Big Fatty. Ah! The fat man seemed to have some kind of irresolvable grudge against the woman. When he heard this, his eyes turned red as blood, and dense tentacles jumped out from behind the fish tank and wrapped around the woman. Facing the incoming tentacles, the woman just dodged sideways and easily dodged the tentacles' attack. "Why are you still so impatient?" The woman covered her mouth lightly and giggled. Then he took off his shoes under the angry eyes of the fat man, put the pair of white shoes aside, rolled up his hair, stepped lightly on the soft blanket with his flesh-colored stockings, and sat on the desk. She gracefully raised her slender legs and hooked her toes towards the fat man. Seeing this scene, Big Fat went completely crazy, his eyes were full of anger and hatred, and he saw his tentacles twisting into one force and jerking forward. The airflow in the room was violent, as if a hurricane had blown up from the ground. Some fish tanks exploded at the same time, carrying countless broken glass and shooting towards the woman. When the woman saw this, a bright silver light burst out from the face on her chest and wrapped around her body. She rushed directly in front of the big fat man. She struck out like lightning and punched the big fat man in the throat, causing the big fat man to bow in pain. However, the woman kicked him on the chin, causing his body to rise back involuntarily. If you say you are a waste, you will always be a waste. The woman's palms split apart and she scratched wildly at the big fat body. In an instant, she cut dozens of slender and deep wounds on his fat body. Dark red blood spurted out. He roared in pain, thinking I need to close my arms and die with this woman. However, the woman's speed was far superior to that of Big Fat, and she easily dodged his stupid arm as soon as she bent down. At the same time, the mouth on her abdomen opened, and a tongue full of barbs came out, directly making a hole in the fat abdomen. "You don't want to die with me, do you?" "Oh, I'm afraid." The woman's face was full of helplessness and fear, and she threw herself into the big fat man's arms. She looked like she was acting coquettishly, but the cracked mouth on her two palms was biting the big fat man without any politeness at all. "Next piece of meat." "Ah!" Painful howls echoed in the office. The fat man waved his arms to try to break away from the woman's arms, but as soon as he moved, an electric current instantly penetrated his body. I saw the faces on the schizophrenia woman's chest, and her eyes flashed with electric currents hitting the fat body from time to time. Hearing the screams from the big fat man behind him, Su Tong couldn't help but slow down, looked back in the direction of the office, hesitated, and decided to abandon the big fat man. The strength of the schizophrenia girl is far greater than that of Big Fatty, and he is not sure that he can kill her. Besides, his real goal is to find the monkey as soon as possible, rather than caring about the cannibalism between the two evolved people. Thinking of this, he did not hesitate to speed up and move forward. "Brother!" A shout of Big Brother made him pause, look back at the corridor, and then at the fire escape not far away in front of him. He stretched out his hand to scratch his hair irritably, took a few steps forward, and curled his lips. "It's really, haha." He twisted his neck and smiled helplessly at the air in front of him. When he turned around, his whole face was instantly covered with a thick layer of haze and fierce light. "Brother? When did you recognize your brother? Let him come out and let me see." She glanced around with her peripheral vision. At this time, her pupils contracted and she stared at the oil painting hanging on the wall. "You idiot, the boss will crush your head with his own hands if he knows you destroyed his portrait." The gastro-schizophrenia woman's face became even more ugly. In fact, if the boss knew that the oil painting had been destroyed, she would also be in trouble. When she thought of this, she put her hands on Big Fat's shoulders, and her sharp tongue penetrated Big Fat's shoulders, piercing him alive into the wall behind him. It looks like an enlarged insect specimen in a specimen holder. A sharp light flashed in his eyes, and he stared at the fat face, spitting out each word through his teeth. "You're fired." He raised his palm and saw a bright red tongue sticking out of the cracked mouth on the palm. Just when he was about to chew off the big fat head. I swallowed the wind, kissed the rain, and buried the setting sun without hesitation. I rode the mountains and the sea and followed the snowy paths without despair. You can twist flowers and bend wine to make people crazy. You can't prevent it with these two eyes and hundreds of arms or thousands of hands. The sudden sound of music made the woman turn her head suspiciously, looking at Su Tong, who was leaning against the door beam with a strange look on her face. A scorching fire lit up the cigar, and Su Tong gently blew on the ash before looking at the woman in front of him. "Didn't anyone tell you that you will be fined if you fire employees at will?" Su Tong put down the cigar in his hand and pressed the pause button on the Walkman on his waist. The eyelids were raised suddenly, and the clear black and white eyes seemed to be burning. The look and posture were like a tiger leaning slightly forward and peeping at its prey, spraying out a slightly fishy, warm, and hungry breath. Greedily coveting the enemy's flesh and blood, even the soul. "You." After the gastroschisis woman subconsciously took half a step back, her eyes were as selective as if the person standing in front of her was her boss. Then she suddenly realized that something was wrong. After looking at Su Tong up and down, she found that he was still the boss. After seeing a living person, his expression suddenly became strange. Thinking that she was actually frightened by a living person, the gastroschisis woman suddenly became angry and said, "You are looking for death." When he raised his hand, someone was already rushing towards him. But Su Tong was faster than him and was already prepared. He waved his hand and threw out an inflatable doll. Maybe the gastroschisis woman never thought that this man would throw such a shameful thing and slap her. Just tear it apart. The moment the doll exploded, a strong and pungent smell hit her. Before the gastro-schizophrenia girl could understand what it smelled like, Su Tong flicked his hand, and the sparkling cigar flew in front of her. Boom! In an instant, scorching fire exploded in front of him. The gastroschisis woman let out a muffled groan and her body fell backwards. Her hair, eyelashes, and eyebrows were instantly burned to ashes by the flames, and half of her face was blown to pieces. Taking advantage of your illness to kill you, Su Tong will never forget the essence of this sentence. When the gastroschisis woman's body fell back, he had already raised the big knife above his head and struck at the gastroschisis woman's head. Maybe it was out of instinct for danger, or maybe the gastroschisis woman still had such a strong consciousness, but when the big knife fell, the twisted faces on her chest let out a sharp scream, and a ball of silver spewed out from her mouth. The bright light shrouded the body of the gastro-schizophrenia woman. Under the strong light, the gastroschisis woman suddenly rushed forward at this moment, stretched out her arm and slapped away the big knife that almost hit her head, and at the same time grabbed Su Tong's head directly with the other hand. The big mouth with a cracked palm reveals sharp fangs. There is no doubt that it has been prepared for a long time. If this slap falls, it will at least tear off the scalp of the bastard in front of him. But her movements seemed to have been predicted by Su Tong, and she grabbed her with a slap. The rough feel made him feel like she had caught something on a hard marble. Instead of tearing Su Tong's head open, a big tooth broke out on the spot. When she opened her eyes, she realized that her hand was actually holding a paper figure. The paper man looks very cute, with a chubby little face, a small round hat, and a simple and honest smile on his face. At first glance, he looks like a smaller version of Big Fat. However, is this really the case? The fat black pupils revealed a deep light. Gong opened his hands, and the smile on his face gradually turned gloomy. He pulled out a silver dagger from his sleeve and quickly rushed towards the gastroschisis woman. What's this? Looking at the little thing rushing towards her, the gastroschisis woman subconsciously wanted to avoid it. But the speed she was proud of was far inferior to Xiaopang's agility. With Su Tong's 50% control bonus, Xiaopang was like a flying top, spinning in mid-air and changing. The direction of the attack was to hit the Schizophora woman's chest. Puff puff. The dagger was not long, but it was as fast as lightning. It quickly punched several bloody holes in the blurry faces on her chest. She howled in pain, and silver electricity surged out of the woman's body, and she punched the little fat one. After driving, he ran towards Su Tong regardless of the situation. It's not that she knows the principle of catching the thief first, but she simply thinks that Su Tong is easier to deal with as a human. Seeing the gastroschisis woman approaching, he could have chosen to run. All he had to do was take a step back. The complicated office terrain behind him could buy him a lot of time. But he didn't. He raised the long knife in his hand and rushed towards the schizophrenia girl. Demon had arrived. Dark blue flames instantly ignited on Su Tong's body. The flames turned into combat armor and even extended to the sword. He slashed it down with a wave of his hand, creating a dark, cold flame in the air. This scene may have been something the schizophrenia girl had never expected, but she had no time to dodge. The flash of silver light on her body accelerated her speed to the extreme. Apparently he had smelled the danger and wanted to knock Su Tong away and escape from here. Boom! There was an ear-splitting explosion, and the blade split against the silver light. Su Tong's body shook a few times, and the huge force suddenly split his jaw open, and blood splashed on the ground. Hee, that's all. Under the flash of magic flames, that delicate face became more and more cold. Although the overall increase brought by the arrival of the devil was short-lived, the power gained was definitely worth the price. Su Tong's provocative eyes deeply stimulated the schizophrenia girl's self-esteem. She gritted her teeth and pressed her body against Su Tong. "I'll eat you." The abdomen suddenly split open, and the abyssal mouth full of barbs opened, and the sharp tongue stabbed out like lightning, but the tongue didn't have time to touch Su Tong. The slender tentacles had already grabbed hold of the tongue first. It was the big fat man on the side. Even though the countless barbs on the tongue cut off his tentacles one by one, the big fat man refused to let go. "Open." Now the schizophrenia girl was in a hurry, because Su Tong's broadsword struck down again. With the huge force, the silver light on her body suddenly exploded, and her fair and delicate arms were almost broken off. What was even more obscene was that the little fat man behind her was leaning against her, slashing the back of her head and neck with the dagger in his hand. It only took a while for her to chop him until the skin was torn apart and the flesh was bloody. Suddenly, the schizophrenia girl did not hesitate to expose her vital parts. Su Tong seized the opportunity and slashed at her with a knife. However, what he did not expect was that the schizophrenia girl actually grabbed the blade, her scarlet eyes flashing with a ferocious light. "Go to hell." Suddenly an ominous feeling swept through his heart. He decisively gave up the sword in his hand and quickly stepped back. He saw a ball of red light spurting out of the schizophora woman's abdomen. Boom! A red beam of light burst out instantly. Warm blood and broken sawdust suddenly mixed together and danced all over the sky, and there was a strong smell of blood in the air. When the bright light receded, Su Tong opened his eyes and saw a fat and huge body standing in front of him, with a hole the size of a wash basin suddenly appearing in his chest. "Hey hey!" With a silly smile on his big and honest face, his body suddenly fell heavily behind him. Boom! The whole floor shook violently. Su Tong's eyes flashed coldly, he wiped the blood on his cheek, and controlled the fat man to hit the schizophrenia girl's face. Click! The sound of the bridge of her nose breaking caused the schizophrenia girl to let out a muffled groan, and her head tilted back. In an instant, Su Tong had already rushed forward, holding the handle of the knife with both hands, kicked the schizophrenia girl in the chest, and pulled the big knife from her chest. "Pull it out." As the blood spurted wildly, the schizophrenia woman stumbled and fell to the ground. Before she could get up, the whole world suddenly spun with the sound of whistling in her ears. Dong! Her head rolled to the ground, and Su Tong stepped forward, stretched out his hand to lift her head off the ground, and then silently raised the big knife in his hand. "You are fired." The same words echoed in the ears of the schizophrenia girl. This might be the last sound she heard in this world. Puff! In an instant, his vision suddenly went dark, and he completely lost consciousness. Bang! The broadsword fell to the ground, and strong side effects hit, but this time the side effects were far worse than before. Su Tong's vision blurred for a while, and an unprecedented feeling of weakness quickly spread throughout his body. Suddenly he fell to the ground uncontrollably. P.S. Naked Running is on the shelves. I hope everyone can support Kyushui. If you are not a Kidian reader, please come to Kidian to give Kyushui a little support. After all, I am trying my best to improve my performance by updating. Otherwise, this book can't really go far. There will be no fifth update today, but the minimum guarantee of 10,000 words is still indispensable, so let's go ahead and write. There will be 2 more updates in the evening. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 94. Weak. An unprecedented feeling of fatigue came over me, as if every bone in my body had been taken away, and my body couldn't find any support. Along with the incoming darkness, a damp rotten smell mixed with the smell of sweat poured into the nasal cavity. As little bits of light illuminated the darkness, but it did not bring hope. In the dim corridor, drops of water dripped from the rusty water pipes above and fell to the ground, leaving a thin puddle on the cement floor. Standing water. Heart-rending screams mixed with the sound of whipping echoed in the corridor. He walked forward step by step and passed by the door of a dormitory. The door was open and there was a man lying on the iron frame bed. He was skinny and skinny. Flies circled around his body from time to time, but he had no desire to drive them away. He stared blankly at the corner with his eyes, and there was a syringe on the ground. Ah! Ah! It was unclear whether the screams were from a man or a woman, and the sound of beatings got closer and closer. In another room, only blood stains were seen on the ground. From time to time, you can hear running footsteps in the empty corridor upstairs. Snapped. The sound of whipping guided him forward, and he saw various weird and bizarre torture instruments in a dilapidated house. As the last iron door was slowly pushed open, a naked man stood in front of him with his back to him, with centipede-like scars extending from his back to his tailbone. The man turned around, but his face was blurry, and his facial features could not be seen clearly. He raised his hand towards him, and looking at it, Su Tong grabbed him by some strange mistake. "Power is never free, give me a higher price." The moment the man finished speaking, the blurred facial features actually changed into his own appearance. He was stunned for a moment, and the man in front of him instantly turned into blue magic flames, suddenly turning the entire world into a sea of fire. Cough, cough, cough. The closed eyelid slowly opened, and in the blurred vision, a big and honest face gradually became clear. He turned out to be fat. Looking again, the bloody hole on this guy's chest had actually healed, leaving only a scar the size of a wash basin. Hungry. The fat man patted his belly and looked at him expectantly. Su Tong glanced at the sky outside. It had turned into darkness outside, and the whole room was in a mess, as well as the headless body. It seemed that he had indeed been in a coma for a while, but this didn't seem to be a bad thing, because he found that the after effects of the Demon King's arrival were no longer there. He called out the props book and prepared to get some snacks for the big fat man. When he opened it, he found several pieces of information from the props book floating in front of him. You have met the conditions to unlock the awakening skill of demon power. As a pursuer of power, the awakening skill is activated. Seeker of power, maximize the ability to activate the Demon King 4 times. Item card: Demon Power Awakening Skill unlocked, Dark Lord. Awakening Skill, Dark Lord. There is no script consumption, and the user makes a deal with the Demon King at the cost of his own life force. After activation, the overall physique will be temporarily increased twice, and the magic flame damage will be increased by 2 levels. Duration, 2 minutes. Cooling time: the devil likes you who are desperate for your life. Note: once the prop card is traded, changed, or awakened, the skill will be closed. Looking at the prompts on the prop card, Su Tong was stunned for a moment, remembering the dream he had when he was in a coma, and then realized that feelings were not a dream. I took another look at this demon power item card. It was found that the other 2 abilities had not changed much, but the entry on the sequelae of the devil's arrival had actually disappeared. Oh, relationships don't require money, but they cost lives. Su Tong curled his lips. This was good news. What he was most afraid of was the powerful sequelae brought about by the arrival of the devil. That thing was simply too sour. It's like you go to a massage parlor and order $399, and then a 399-pound fat girl comes and pinches you hard. It feels so sour. If you add your own Retributor title skill, oh, then the massage will be upgraded to a back step. Coke, chicken drumsticks, and various snacks were taken out by Su Tong and placed on the ground. Looking at the happy face of the big fat man, he felt an inexplicable sense of peace in his heart. He turned around and picked up the little fat man who was out of control on the ground, and wiped the dust on it. It was not bad. He was hit hard by the gastroschisis woman a few times. Since it only left some scratches, he could go back and repair it with paper pulp and it would be back to the original state. Throwing Xiaopang into the prop book, Su Tong walked to the desk. Looking at the head that was split in half, I saw a dark purple crystal as big as a quail egg in the rotten flesh. This crystal is more than twice as big as the frog-faced man's brain crystal. It seems that evolvers also have levels, but he still doesn't know how to divide these levels. Throw this brain crystal into the item book. Excellent evolver brain crystal, special props, temporary. Among the very few evolvers, some gained great power in the early stages and mutated rapidly. They were more powerful than ordinary evolvers and were the leaders among the evolvers. Usage: eat directly. After consumption, the super pure evolver brain crystals, in addition to allowing you to temporarily acquire an evolver ability, also have a strong improvement effect, which can greatly improve your abilities in certain aspects. Prioritize improving your strengths. Note: unlike the brain crystals of ordinary evolvers, this brain crystal carries extremely high value. If you don't eat it, it will be an extremely precious resource if you keep it on your body. My strengths. Looking at the prompts given in the prop book, he lowered his head silently, pinched his waistband with his fingers, and raised his eyebrows slightly. Can this thing be strengthened? Can it be a mace? Ahem. Shaking his head, he temporarily dispelled this irrational thought. He picked up the brain crystal in his hand and saw that the brain crystal was shining with dazzling luster in the night. Even the crown jewel on the Queen of England's head is by no means so gorgeous. After wiping it a few times, he threw it into his mouth without any hesitation. He now urgently needs to quickly improve his strength, whether it is now or in the future. The things in this building far exceed those infected outside, even the evolved ones. The script points he had were not enough, and without the script points, what was the difference between him and ordinary people? So he had no choice at all. A little salty. After eating the brain crystals, it soon began to take effect. A stream of hot air surged up from his abdomen. It felt like taking a big mouthful of mustard and going straight to the Tianling guy. But soon a chill hit him, making every hair on his body stand up, and his arms were covered with visible goosebumps. You have eaten the best brain crystals, and your physique is improving. The prompt sounded in his ears, and Su Tong sat down on the ground. His teeth were trembling, but there was a fire burning in his stomach. It's cold outside and hot inside. It's so sour that it makes you want to vomit. Su Tong couldn't help but vomited immediately. There was nothing in his stomach, but at this moment it was like he was in over his head. Vomit. He was almost out of breath and vomited, and finally spit out a ball of dark liquid. This dark stuff was smelly and fishy and mixed with an indescribable smell. Even the fat man turned his head away with a look of disgust. But after spitting out the black stuff, Su Tong felt refreshed. It was as if all the heat and coldness in his body had been spit out in an instant. My whole body felt indescribably comfortable and relaxed. But before he could take a breath, his palms suddenly felt numb and tingling with a heartbreaking itch, as if something was about to come out of his palms. With a tear sound, a hole opened in his palm, but not a drop of blood flowed out. Instead, as the hole opened, a green eyeball came out of his palm. What's this? Su Tong was stunned and turned his palm to himself. Another perspective appeared in his mind, as if he was looking at himself through his eyeballs. The temporary evolution has been completed. The overall physical fitness has been temporarily increased by 40%. You have gained an evolver ability, Eye of the Thunderer. Please try it yourself for the specific ability. As the prompt ended, a silver arc of electricity suddenly burst out from the cyan eyeballs. He tried to wave his hand forward, and a silver electric light suddenly hit the oil painting on the side with a bang sound, and a big hole was blown open in the head of the oil painting. Oh! Seeing the new ability he had evolved, Su Tong's face suddenly showed a smile. This ability greatly enhanced his mid-range striking methods. It can be regarded as making up for one of my shortcomings. The most important thing is that this ability does not require script points at all, and there is no cooling time limit. If it were a prop card, these two items alone would be enough to be considered the best. If you put it in an exhibition, it would be broken by how many people would break your head and grab it. Too bad it's temporary. He sighed. After all, such an ability does not belong to him. Once he completes the mission in the script world, he will completely disappear after returning. As for the advantages of improvement, isn't it a long time to increase the overall physical fitness by 40%? In fact, if you think about it, this is not unreasonable. After all, the prop cards in the prop book are not your own abilities. If you want to use them, you must follow the principle of equal exchange. On the contrary, your physique has been permanently increased by 20%, and it is truly yours. Now with an additional 40% increase, he now feels that he has endless strength all over his body. The brain crystals of one evolver have such a strong increase. If I hunt a few more evolvers. Buzz, buzz. Just as he was pondering in his mind whether the core concepts of the script world were hunting and evolution, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound. He quickly put his hand into his pocket and found that his cell phone was ringing. When he looked at the caller ID, he saw that it was the monkey he was looking for.